The gunshot cracked through the morning air like thunder, sending chickens scattering and women clutching their aprons. Maverick Donovan stood in the dusty main street of Willowbrook, smoking Colt still in his hand, the tin can spinning wildly 20 feet away. The crowd that had gathered to watch the impromptu shooting display melted away like snow in summer. Mothers yanking their children behind storefronts and men averting their eyes. "Show's over," Maverick drawled, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. His reputation preceded him wherever he rode, a man who'd killed 3 men in fair fights, broken more bones than a battlefield surgeon, and left a trail of broken hearts from Texas to Montana. The black leather duster hung loose on his tall frame, beneath the wide brim of his hat. Steel-gray eyes surveyed the retreating townspeople with cold amusement. Cordelia Brightwater emerged from behind the schoolhouse steps, where she'd been, frozen in terror, her heart hammering against her ribs. The new schoolmarm had arrived in Willowbrook just 2 weeks prior, fresh from a teaching college back east, and nothing had prepared her for the sight of this dangerous stranger. Dark auburn hair had come loose from its careful bun, and she clutched her lesson plans against her chest like armor. "Magnificent shooting, sir," she found herself saying, though her voice trembled. Something about the lonely set of his shoulders beneath that intimidating exterior called to her teacher's instincts. The same instincts that recognized when a child was acting out from pain rather than meanness. Maverick's head snapped toward her, surprise flickering across his weathered features. No one in Willowbrook had spoken to him directly since he'd ridden into town 3 days ago. They whispered about him, certainly about how he'd beaten 2 men senseless at the saloon. How his horse was as black and dangerous as its rider. How his very presence seemed to darken the air around him. "Most folks round here seem to think differently," he replied, studying the slip of a woman who dared approach him. She was pretty in a delicate way, with intelligent green eyes and skin like porcelain. But there was steel beneath that refined exterior. "Most folks around here haven't seen real marksmanship," Cordelia said, taking another step closer, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "I grew up with 5 brothers. I know skill when I see it." A ghost of a smile touched Maverick's lips, the first genuine expression anyone in Willowbrook had witnessed from him. 5 brothers. No wonder you ain't running scared like the rest of them sheep." "I'm not easily frightened, Mr. Donovan. Maverick Donovan." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mocking if not for the sudden sincerity in his eyes. "And you'd be the new schoolmarm everyone's been whispering about." "Cordelia Brightwater," she said, extending a gloved hand that he stared at for a long moment before gently taking it in his own. His hands were calloused and scarred, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Miss Brightwater," he murmured, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. For a moment, the dangerous cowboy facade slipped entirely, revealing something raw and hungry underneath, a loneliness that matched her own. The spell broke when Sheriff Holbrook came stomping down the street, hand on his weapon. "Donovan, all this shooting about? You're disturbing the peace." Maverick's face hardened back into its familiar mask. "Just target practice, Sheriff. Nothing illegal about a man keeping his skills sharp." But as he mounted his black stallion and rode toward the edge of town, Cordelia noticed something that made her heart skip. Tucked in his saddlebag was a worn copy of McGuffey's Reader, its pages yellow with age and handling. 3 days passed before Cordelia saw Maverick again. She'd found herself watching the streets during her lunch breaks, telling herself she was simply observing the town dynamics for her own safety. The truth was more complicated. Something about that brief encounter had lodged itself in her thoughts. Like a splinter, she was walking home from the schoolhouse on Thursday evening when she heard voices coming from the abandoned barn behind the church. Children's voices mixed with a deeper rumble she recognized instantly. Her curiosity overcoming her caution, Cordelia crept closer and peered through a crack in the weathered wood inside. Maverick Donovan sat cross-legged on a hay bale surrounded by 6 children, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 10. In his hands was the same worn reader she'd glimpsed in his saddlebag, and he was slowly, patiently sounding out words with little Jasper McNeil, whose father worked the mill. The ... cat. The set. On the ... double quotes, Jasper struggled with the final word. "Your time, son," Maverick said gently. "What sound does M make?" Matt. The cat sat on the mat. That's right, fine, Jasper, real fine. The pride in Maverick's voice was unmistakable, and Cordelia watched in amazement as the fearsome gunslinger ruffled the boy's hair with obvious affection. My turn, Mr. Mav, piped up tiny Rosalind Fletcher, daughter of the town drunk. Her dress was patched and too small, but her eyes shone with eagerness as she reached for the book. Cordelia's throat tightened with emotion. These were the children whose parents couldn't afford to send them to her school, or who were too ashamed of their circumstances to let their youngsters mix with the more fortunate families. Yet here was this supposedly heartless outlaw, giving them what no one else would a chance to learn. A branch snapped under her foot, and suddenly 6 pairs of eyes plus 2 steel-gray ones were staring directly at her. The children scrambled to their feet in panic, but Maverick held up a calming hand. Easy now, he said quietly. Spritewater ain't gonna hurt nobody. Cordelia stepped into the barn, her mind racing. I'm sorry for intruding. I heard voices, and I was concerned, ... Ain't doing nothing wrong? Little Rosalind declared fiercely, stepping protectively in front of Maverick. Mr. Mav is teaching us letters and numbers and stories. Of course you're not doing anything wrong, Cordelia said gently, kneeling to the child's level. Learning is never wrong. It's wonderful. Maverick stood slowly, his expression unreadable. Children, why don't you head on home now? We'll continue tomorrow. As the children filed out, each one stopping to hug Maverick's legs or squeeze his hand, Cordelia felt her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. When they were alone, she turned to face him. How long have you been doing this? Month or so, he said gruffly, suddenly focused on straightening the hay bales. Started in the last town, some of these kids. They got nobody looking out for their learning, but why keep it secret?
The town would what?
His laugh was bitter. They'd run me out faster than a prairie fire if they knew their precious children were spending time with the likes of me. Better they don't know. Cordelia studied his profile, the strong jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his neck, the careful way he held himself as if expecting attack at any moment. You're not what they think you are, ain't I? He turned to face her, and she saw raw pain flash across his features. I've killed men, Miss Brightwater. I've done things that would curl your hair. These hands ain't clean, but they're gentle with children, she said softly. They turn pages carefully so as not to tear them. They guide small fingers along words with infinite patience. She stepped closer, close enough to smell leather and saddle soap and something uniquely masculine. Why do you let them think the worst of you? For a moment she thought he might answer honestly. Instead, he picked up his hat and settled it low over his eyes. Some of us don't get the luxury of being understood, Miss Brightwater. Good evening. He brushed past her toward the door, but she caught his arm. The contact sent electricity shooting through both of them. Cordelia, she said breathlessly. My name is Cordelia. Cordelia, he repeated, and again her name sounded like something precious in his rough voice. His eyes searched hers for a long moment before he gently extracted his arm and disappeared into the gathering dusk. Cordelia couldn't concentrate on her lessons the next day. Her mind kept drifting to the image of Maverick with those children, the way his entire demeanor had transformed in their presence. During lunch, she made a decision that would have scandalized her fellow teachers back east. She gathered her supplies and walked purposefully to Fletcher's Mercantile, where she purchased several slate boards, chalk, and a collection of basic primers. The proprietor, Cornelius Fletcher, eyed her suspiciously. Planning to expand your classroom, Miss Brightwater? Something like that? She replied diplomatically, counting out her coins. It would take a significant bite from her modest salary. But some things were more important than financial comfort. That evening, she arrived at the abandoned barn before Maverick and his students. She'd arranged the supplies neatly on a makeshift table fashioned from old crates, and had even brought along some of her mother's oatmeal cookies from her personal stores. When Maverick appeared with his small band of eager learners, he stopped, short at the sight of her preparations. The children, however, whooped with delight at the sight of individual slates and the promised treats. What's all this? Maverick asked quietly as the children dove into organizing their new supplies. A partnership, Cordelia said, meeting his gaze steadily. These children deserve more than one worn reader passed between them. They deserve proper materials, structured lessons, and they deserve someone who won't bring shame on their families. By association, Maverick interrupted, but his tone lacked its usual edge. They deserve someone who cares about their futures, she countered. Which you obviously do, or you wouldn't be here. Little Jasper tugged on Maverick's coat. Mr. Mav, look. I can write my name. He held up his slate proudly, showing crooked but recognizable letters. It's mighty fine work, Jasper, Maverick said, his voice suspiciously thick. He looked back at Cordelia. You sure about this? Folks find out you're spending time with me. Your reputation, my reputation is my own. Concern, she said firmly. Besides, what could be more respectable than education? For the next 2 hours, they worked together in surprising harmony. Cordelia's formal training complemented Maverick's instinctive understanding of each child's needs. She watched him guide Rosalind through simple arithmetic, his large hands covering her tiny ones as they moved stones around to represent numbers. She saw him listen with infinite patience as stuttering Timothy worked through a story about a brave rabbit. How did you learn to be so good with them? She asked, during a quiet moment while the children practiced their letters. Maverick was silent. For so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. I was them once. Kid whose PA drank too much and whose ma worked her fingers to the bone trying to keep food on the table. Teacher in our settlement was a mean old biddy who thought poor kids weren't worth her time. His jaw tightened. I swore if I ever got the chance I'd do different. Where did you learn to read? Army cook took pity on me when I was 16. Figured even a no-account soldier should know his letters. Ghost of a smile crossed his face. Sergeant Murphy. Irish as the day is long and twice as stubborn. Beat reading into my thick skull with patience and whiskey. Cordelia felt tears. Prick her eyes at the image of a young maverick, hungry for knowledge and kindness. He sounds like a good man. Best I ever knew. He died at Gettysburg. Maverick's voice was rough with old grief. Left me his books, still carry some of them, as if summoned by their conversation. Little Rosalind approached with her slate. Miss Cordelia, I wrote you a story. The child had laboriously spelled out. The nice lady and Mr. Mav, help us learn to read the end. It's beautiful, Rosalind, Cordelia said, throat tight with emotion. Over the girl's head. She met Maverick's eyes and saw her own feelings. Reflected there's something tender and dangerous blooming between them like wildflowers after rain. When the children finally departed with promises to return tomorrow, Cordelia began gathering the supplies. Maverick moved to help her, their hands brushing as they reached for the same primer. The contact sent sparks up her arm, and she looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Why? He asked quietly. Why risk everything to help them? To help me? She could have given him a dozen practical answers about education and civic duty. Instead, she told him the truth. It's because when I look at you with those children, I see the man you really are. And he's worth risking everything for. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, his expression shuddering. You don't know what you're saying, Cordelia? I'm not a man worth saving. But as he disappeared into the night, she whispered to the empty barn, yes, you are. Word traveled fast in a small town, and by the end of the week, whispers were circulating about the schoolmarm's mysterious evening activities. Cordelia noticed the sideways glances from other women at the general store, the way conversations stopped when she approached. She held her head high and continued her work, both in the official schoolhouse and the secret classroom in the barn. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon when Mrs. Prudence Hartwell, the mayor's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Willowbrook, cornered Cordelia after school. Miss Brightwater, there are concerns about your associations, the older woman said, her voice dripping with false concern. People are saying you've been seen in the company of that dangerous gunfighter. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Cordelia replied coolly, though her heart was racing. Don't play coy with me, dear. It's most improper for a young lady in your position to consort, the man of his reputation. The school board is meeting tonight to discuss the situation. That evening, Cordelia sat in the barn with Maverick and their students, but her mind was elsewhere. During a break in the lessons, Maverick noticed her distraction. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, sitting beside her on a hay bale while the children practiced their sums. "The town knows," she said simply, "about us spending time together. They're threatening my position." Maverick's face went granite hard. "Then this ends tonight." "No. Get." The children looked up at her outburst, and she lowered her voice. "No, Maverick. These children need this. Need you. They need you more. You're their real teacher. Their chance at a proper education? I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for." Before she could argue further, the barn door burst open. Sheriff Holbrook entered, followed by Mayor Hartwell and 3 other town council members. The children huddled together in fear as the men took in the scene slates and books scattered around, obvious evidence of learning taking place. "Well, well," Mayor Hartwell said, his voice cold. "What have we here?" "Reading lessons," Cordelia said, rising to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster. "Nothing more, nothing less. Miss Brightwater, you were hired to teach the children of respectable families in a proper schoolhouse." Councilmember Norton declared, "Not to ... fraternize with outlaws in barns. These children deserve education just as much as any others," she said fiercely. "Their families' circumstances don't diminish their worth or their potential." "That's not the point," Mayor Hartwell snapped. "The point is your complete disregard for propriety and safety. This man is dangerous." "Mr. Donovan has shown nothing but patience and kindness with these children," Cordelia protested. "Enough!" Sheriff Holbrook stepped forward. "Donovan, you've got until sunrise to clear out of Willowbrook. And if I catch you within 10 miles of this town again, I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace." "On what grounds?" Maverick asked quietly, though Cordelia could see the tension coiled in his frame. "I'll find grounds," the sheriff promised darkly. Little Rosalind suddenly broke free from the group of frightened children and threw her arms around Maverick's legs. "Don't make Mr. Mav go away. He's teaching us to read. He's not mean. Child, get away from that man this instant." Mrs. Hartwell gasped in horror. "No," Rosalind cried. "He reads us stories and he's nice and he brings us cookies sometimes." Other children began to chime in, their voices overlapping in Maverick's defense. Jasper stepped forward, chin thrust out bravely. "Mr. Mav helped me write a letter to my grandmama. He ain't scary once you know him." Mayor Hartwell's face was purple with outrage. "Miss Brightwater, you will cease this circus immediately, or you will be terminated from your position effective immediately." Cordelia looked around the barn at the children clinging to Maverick, the supplies she'd bought with her own money, at the books and slates that represented hope and possibility. Then she looked at Maverick, saw the resignation and pain in his eyes, and made the most important decision of her life. "Then I suppose you'll need to find a new teacher," she said quietly. The barn fell silent except for the sound of Mayor Hartwell's shocked, sputtering "You ... You can't be serious, Cordelia." "No," Maverick said urgently. "You can't throw away your career for this, for me." She turned to face him fully, letting him see the determination in her eyes. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what matters most, Miss Brightwater." "Be reasonable," Sheriff Holbrook tried. "Think about your future, your reputation." "My reputation will be just fine. Thank you," she said crisply. "And my future is my own to choose." As the town officials filed out in frustrated defeat, muttering threats and dire predictions, Cordelia knelt among the children who were clinging to both her and Maverick like lifelines. "What happens now?" Tiny Timothy asked, tears streaming down his face. Cordelia looked up at Maverick, saw the war raging in his expression, love and fear and desperate hope all tangled together. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." By dawn, news of Cordelia's defiance had spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. As she packed her meager belongings from the boarding house, she could hear the whispered conversations from the street below, some scandalized, others quietly supportive. Mrs. Fletcher from the Mercantile had slipped a note under her door. "God bless you for standing up for our children." Maverick arrived as she was carrying her trunk downstairs. Without a word, he took it from her hands, his touch lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly as they loaded her belongings onto his wagon. "It's not too late to change your mind. I could leave town, and you could beg forgiveness from the school board, Maverick Donovan," she interrupted firmly. "If you think I'm the kind of woman who begs forgiveness for doing what's right, then you don't know me at all." A slow smile spread across his weathered features. "No, I reckon you're not that kind of woman at all." They drove in comfortable silence to the small homestead. Maverick had been renting on the outskirts of town a modest cabin with a barn and enough land. For a garden? It wasn't much, but it was theirs for now. "The children will find us here," Cordelia said with confidence as she surveyed their new classroom space in the barn. "Their parents may not approve, but children have a way of getting what they need." Was right. By afternoon, little Rosalind appeared at the cabin door, followed shortly by Jasper and the others. Word had somehow spread among the families that lessons would continue, unofficial though they might be. "My PA says you're both crazy," Jasper announced cheerfully as he settled onto a hay bale with his slate. "But he also said, crazy folks sometimes do the most good in the world." Over the following days, an unexpected thing began to happen. Parents who had initially been horrified by their association started arriving to see for themselves what was happening in the makeshift schoolroom. Mrs. Fletcher came first. Bringing her youngest boy and staying to watch a lesson, she was followed by the blacksmith's wife, then the mill worker's widow. "I ain't never seen Tommy so excited about learning," the blacksmith's wife confided to Cordelia. After watching her son work through a reading exercise with Maverick's patient guidance, "That boy's been struggling something fierce, but you too. You make it seem possible." Word began to spread beyond Willowbrook. Parents from neighboring settlements started bringing their children for lessons, some traveling hours for the privilege. Cordelia organized the teaching into proper curriculum, while Maverick's intuitive understanding of each child's needs created an environment where learning flourished. One evening, as they cleaned up after a particularly successful day of lessons, Maverick found Cordelia sitting on the cabin's front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her on the wooden steps. "I was thinking about my life back east," she said quietly. "The proper ladies' academy, the prescribed curriculum, the rigid expectations. I thought I was a good teacher then, but I was just ... adequate. Following rules and regulations, and now..." She turned to look at him, this man who had turned her, whirled upside down in the best possible way. "I feel like I'm finally teaching, really teaching, because of you, because of us," he corrected gently. "I never knew book learning could be mixed with heart the way you do it. These kids... they're getting something special, something neither of us could give them alone." The space between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken possibilities. Slowly, carefully, as if she might disappear at any moment, Maverick reached up to tuck a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. His calloused fingers lingered against her cheek. "Cordelia," he said, her name rough with emotion, "I need you to know. What you've given me, what you've shown me about myself... I never thought I could be worthy of something like this. Someone like you. You've been worthy all along," she whispered, covering his hand with her own. "You just needed someone to see it." This time, when he leaned toward her, she didn't pull away. Their lips met softly, tentatively, then with growing passion as weeks of suppressed longing finally found expression. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Maverick said simply, as if the words had been torn from his soul. "I know I got no right." "You have every right," Cordelia said fiercely, framing his face with her hands. "Because I love you too. Your gentleness with children, your hidden kindness, your wounded heart that keeps loving despite everything, all of it. I love all of it." As if drawn by their joy, fireflies began to dance around the porch, and in the distance, they could hear the soft sounds of the evening settling over their small corner of the world. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was. And it was perfect. 3 months later, their unconventional school had become something of a legend throughout the territory. Families traveled from as far as 50 miles away to enroll their children in what people had begun calling the Maverick Academy, though. Cordelia insisted the name was entirely too dramatic. The success couldn't be ignored, even by Willowbrook's stubbornly traditional leadership. When the territorial education inspector, Professor Quentin Aldridge, arrived unannounced on a crisp October morning, both Cordelia and Maverick felt their carefully built world teetering on the edge of collapse. Professor Aldridge was everything. Cordelia expected impeccably dressed, formally educated, and armed with a clipboard full of standards and regulations. He spent the morning observing their classes with an expression of polite skepticism that gradually shifted to something approaching amazement. He watched 8-year-old Penelope Marsh, daughter of a poor trapper, recite Shakespeare with the same attention he gave to Timothy Fletcher's mathematical calculations. He observed Maverick teaching a mixed-age group about geography using stories of his travels, he making distant places come alive with vivid descriptions that had the children hanging. On every word during the lunch break, Professor Aldrich requested a private word with both teachers. Cordelia braced herself for criticism, but his first question surprised her. "Mr. Donovan, where did you receive your formal education?" "I didn't," Maverick replied honestly. "Everything I know came from books and hard experience." "And yet you demonstrate pedagogical instincts that would be the envy of university-trained educators," the professor mused. "Miss Brightwater, your integration of formal curriculum with practical application is extraordinary. These children are not just learning, they're thriving." Relief flooded through Cordelia. "Does this mean ... means I'm recommending that?" "The territorial government officially recognized this institution as a legitimate school," Professor Aldridge announced. "Furthermore, I'm prepared to offer you both positions at the Territorial Teachers College in the capital." The offer hung in the air between them, prestigious positions, recognition, a return to respectability for Cordelia, an unprecedented opportunity for Maverick. It was everything they should want. "That's very generous," Cordelia said carefully. "But these children need us here. Can't abandon them for personal advancement." "Ah," Professor Aldridge smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. What if I told you the territorial government was prepared to fund the construction of a proper schoolhouse right here? With official backing, certified curriculum, and salaries for both of you?" Maverick and Cordelia exchanged glances, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. "There would be conditions, of course," the professor continued. "You'd both need to complete some formal certification requirements courses, summer intensives. Mr. Donovan, ... double quotes. He paused delicately. "Your reputation would need some rehabilitation." That evening, after Professor Aldridge had departed with promises to return with official documents, Cordelia and Maverick sat on their porch discussing the incredible turn their lives had taken. "Can you imagine it?" Cordelia said dreamily. "A real school building, proper supplies, official recognition. And me with teaching credentials," Maverick added with wonder. "Who would have thought a broken-down gunfighter could become a real educator?" "You already are a real educator," Cordelia insisted. "Papers just make it official." As they talked, they became aware of movement in the yard. One by one, their students and their families began emerging from the evening shadows. The Fletcher family, the Marshes, the McNeils, and dozens of others. They carried lanterns and torches, creating a warm glow in the gathering darkness. Old Pete Fletcher stepped forward as spokesman.
"Hey, we heard about the government man's visit,"
he said gruffly. "I heard there might be changes coming." Cordelia's heart sank. Were they here? To object? To demand she and Maverick leave before bringing too much attention to their quiet community? "I wanted you to know," Pete continued, his weathered face serious, "that whatever official folks say about you two, we know the truth. We know what you've done for our children, how you've changed their lives, hell, changed all our lives." "Mr. Pete's right," called out Mrs. Marsh. "My Penelope's reading better than her older brothers now, and they went to regular school." "Jasper's writing letters to his cousins back east," added Mrs. McNeil, making connections he never would have made before. "What we're trying to say," Pete continued, his voice thick with emotion, "is that whatever comes next, you'll always have a home here. You'll always be family." As the families dispersed back to their homes, leaving Cordelia and Maverick alone with their joy and their dreams, Maverick pulled her close. Think we can handle being respectable? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. I think, Cordelia said, leaning into his warmth, that we're going to redefine what respectable means. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, blessing this unlikely love story that had grown from suspicion and fear into something that would change an entire community forever. 1 year later, the dedication ceremony for the new Willowbrook Community School drew visitors from across 3 territories. The beautiful timber building stood on the hill overlooking town with large windows to let in natural light and a bell tower that could be heard for miles. Inside, proper desks and chairs waited alongside shelves lined with books, some donated by Eastern educational societies, others purchased with funds raised by the grateful community. Cordelia stood at the window of what would be her official classroom, watching the festivities below. She wore a new dress of deep blue silk, a gift from Maverick for her 24th birthday, and her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant style befitting the principal of a certified territorial school. Nervous? Maverick asked, joining her. At the window, his transformation was equally remarkable. Gone were the rough trail clothes and ever-present weapons. In their place was a well-tailored suit and the quiet confidence of a man who had found his true calling. The Territorial Certification Board had not only approved his teaching credentials, but had commended his innovative and effective methodologies. Excited, she corrected, then paused, and perhaps a little nervous. Everything's happening so fast. In the past year, their lives had changed beyond recognition. The correspondence courses had challenged them both, but they'd attacked the work with the same passion they brought to teaching. Maverick's final project, a thesis on educational approaches for underserved rural populations, had been so well received that the Territorial University was considering publishing it. More importantly, their school had become a model that other communities were eager to replicate. They'd received visits from educators, government officials, and even a reporter from a Denver newspaper who'd written a glowing piece about the gunfighter teacher and his lady, Miss Cordelia, Mr. Mav. Little Rosalind Fletcher came racing up the stairs, her Sunday best slightly askew from excitement. At 7, she was now reading at a level that astounded everyone who met her. They're ready for the ribbon cutting. Hand in hand, Cordelia and Maverick walked down to join the crowd gathered around the school's front entrance. Professor Aldridge was there, along with the territorial governor himself. But more important to them were the faces of their students and their families, the people who had believed in them when no one else would. Mayor Hartwell, who had fought the school's approval until the bitter end, stood sullenly at the back of the crowd. His wife, however, had quietly approached Cordelia the week before to ask about enrolling their youngest son, who had been struggling with his letters. Friends, Governor Morrison began, we gathered today to celebrate not just a new school, but a new way of thinking about education in our territory. Principal Brightwater and Professor Donovan have shown us that excellence in teaching comes not from following rigid rules, but from understanding and caring for each individual student. The titles still felt strange. Principal Brightwater and Professor Donovan, but Cordelia was getting used to the idea that respect was something they had earned rather than something she needed to demand. Before we cut this ribbon, the governor continued, I have another announcement to make. The Territorial Education Department is creating a new position, Director of Rural Education Development. This person will travel throughout the territory, helping communities establish schools based on the model pioneered here in Willowbrook. He smiled directly at them. Professor Donovan, would you accept this position? Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was an incredible honor, an incredible opportunity to spread their educational philosophy throughout the West, but Cordelia felt her heart sink. The position would require extensive travel, months away from Willowbrook, from the life they'd built together. Maverick stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. Governor Morrison, I'm deeply honored by the offer, but I'm afraid I can't accept. Murmurs of surprise filled the air. The governor looked genuinely shocked. May I ask why not? Maverick turned to look at Cordelia, his eyes full of love and certainty. Because my place is here, with my students, my community, and ... He dropped to one knee right there in front of everyone, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. With my wife, if she'll have me. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. As Cordelia stared down at this man who continued to surprise her at every turn, the ring was beautiful but simple. Exactly what she would have chosen, a single pearl, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the afternoon sunlight. Cordelia Brightwater, Maverick said, his voice strong despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. You saw something in me when no one else could. You believed in me, fought for me, stood by me, when the whole world was against us.
Oh, Will.
You marry me? Will you build a life and a school and a future with me? Through her tears of joy, Cordelia could see their students' faces, Rosalind jumping up and down with excitement, Jasper grinning so wide his face might split, Timothy clapping his hands with pure delight. These children who had brought them together, who had shown them both what they were truly meant to do with their lives. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Maverick Donovan, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, the crowd exploded in celebration. Someone started playing a fiddle, and soon couples were dancing in the street while children ran between them. Shrieking with laughter, Governor Morrison, beaming at the unexpected turn of events, raised his voice above the celebration. Well then, I suppose we have 2 ceremonies to celebrate today. He gestured to the ribbon stretched across the school's entrance. Principal Brightwater, Professor. Donovan, would you do the honors? Together they cut the ribbon, officially opening the Willowbrook Community School. But as they stepped inside their beautiful new building, Cordelia couldn't help thinking of that old barn where it all began, where a lonely teacher had discovered that the town's most feared man was teaching children to read by lamplight. Any regrets? Maverick asked quietly as they stood in the main hallway. Listening to the sounds of celebration outside, Cordelia looked around at the bright classrooms, the well-stocked library, the promise of all the young minds they would shape together in this place. Then she looked at her fiancés, this complicated, wonderful man who had taught her that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections fit perfectly with your own. Only one, she said, with a mischievous smile. I'm regretting that we have to wait until Sunday for Reverend Matthews to marry us. Maverick laughed, that rare, genuine sound that had become music to her ears. Well then, Mrs. Almost Donovan, I suppose we better make sure this school is ready for Monday. We've got children to teach. As the sun set over Willowbrook painting, the sky in shades of rose and gold, the sounds of celebration continued into the evening. Inside their new school, Cordelia and Maverick worked side by side, arranging desks and organizing supplies, planning lessons and dreaming of the future. They had started as strangers, she, the proper Eastern schoolmarm, he, the dangerous drifter everyone feared. But in finding each other, they had discovered something more precious than respectability or safety. They had found their purpose, their passion, a love strong enough to transform not just their own lives, but an entire community. Outside, little Rosalind's voice could be heard leading the other children in a song they'd learned in their makeshift classroom. Reading and writing and arithmetic too, learning is something we all can do. The words drifted through the windows of the Willowbrook Community School, carried on the evening breeze like a promise of all the bright tomorrows yet to come and in years to come. When visitors asked about the school's remarkable success, the townspeople would always tell the same story about the cruel cowboy no one would approach, and the lonely teacher who saw past his fearsome reputation to the gentle heart beneath. They'd tell how love and learning had transformed them all, proving that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most unlikely meetings. The Willowbrook Community School would go on to graduate students who became teachers, doctors, lawyers, and leaders throughout the territory. But its greatest achievement would always be that first lesson learned in a dusty barn by lamplight, that every child deserves someone who believes in them, and that sometimes the people who seem the most dangerous are simply the ones who have been hurt the most. As for Maverick and Cordelia Donovan, they would spend the next 40 years teaching side by side, raising 6 children of their own, while nurturing thousands of others. And on quiet evenings, when the school was empty and the sun was setting over the Montana hills, they would sometimes walk past the old barn where it all began, remembering the night when a gunfighter's secret kindness changed everything. Their love story would become legend in Willowbrook, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, because it proved that redemption is possible, that love can conquer fear, and that sometimes the most beautiful futures grow from the most broken beginnings. And they all lived, learned, and loved happily ever after.